Okay, let's unpack this deep dive into the fascinating journey of Eritrea, as told through the lens of the source material you, our listener, have shared with us. We're going deep into the layers of its history, its struggle, and its future, all seen through this unique perspective.
And these sources provide a truly compelling narrative, don't they? They lay out the story of a nation guided by not just one, but two fundamental goals: the fight for political independence and the equally vital pursuit of economic emancipation.
Yeah, it really comes across as a story of a long, arduous, but, incredibly resilient journey.
Absolutely.
Right from the very beginning, the sources grab you with this powerful image, this almost prophetic statement from the heroic leader, Hamid Idris Awate. It's quoted as him saying, "At this moment, we alone are standing too close to the fire. Eventually, the entire people of Eritrea will face the heat."
That quote is remarkably insightful, isn't it? The source presents Awate as someone who really understood the magnitude of what he was starting back on September 1st, 1961.
Mm,
That first shot, as the source calls it, wasn't just an isolated act. It heralded the start of something he knew would grow.
right.
He recognized the initial isolation, the vulnerability, we alone are standing too close to the fire, but also foresaw that the consequences of the occupation and the struggle against it, the heat, would eventually reach and involve the entire Eritrean population.
And our mission today, well, it's to navigate through these sources, extracting the most important nuggets of knowledge and insight. We want to help you understand the key phases, the unexpected challenges faced even after achieving independence.
Yeah, the resilience needed.
Exactly, the immense resilience required to defend sovereignty and the persistent, often quiet efforts towards building economic well-being, all based purely on what's in these materials you've given us.
Precisely. We'll delve into this historical context that made armed resistance, well, necessary according to the sources. We'll look at the pivotal military operations that marked the path to statehood, the complex environment Eritrea found itself in after liberation.
And the role of the youth, that seems key too.
Definitely. The crucial and evolving role played by the youth across generations, and then some tangible progress towards economic goals, including some, well, quite striking statistics the sources highlight, particularly around health.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning then. Setting the scene, just as the sources do, we're talking about Eritrea under Ethiopian occupation. The source describes the situation that directly led to the armed resistance taking root.
Yes, the sources really emphasize that this wasn't a random act. The occupation, particularly the actions of the Haile Selassie regime after the illegal annexation of Eritrea, created the conditions for resistance.
How so? What specifically?
Well, the source specifically points to a scorched earth policy that the regime implemented, initially focusing on the lowlands. This wasn't just general hardship, it's presented as a deliberate strategy of devastation, targeting resources, livelihoods, populations in specific areas. And according to the source, this harsh and destructive approach, this intense pressure, was what made the move to armed resistance not just an option, but a necessity, an inevitable response, really, to defend the people and the land.
And this is the backdrop against which Hamid Idris Awate emerges. The source presents him as the heroic leader who ignited this struggle. It marks September 1st, 1961, as the precise date, describing his first shot as the moment that heralded the start of the armed struggle.
Ah.
It sounds like it's presented as the spark that lit a much larger fire.
That single act is given immense symbolic weight in the source, yeah. It wasn't the end of the story, obviously, but the critical initiating moment. And as you mentioned, it's tied directly to Awate's prophecy.
Standing close to the fire bit.
Exactly. He fired that shot knowing perhaps the immediate consequences for himself and his immediate comrades, but also with this long-term vision that the struggle wouldn't remain confined to just a small group.
So what was the initial perception of these early fighters, according to the source? Were they immediately embraced as heroes?
No, quite the opposite, actually. The source explicitly states that initially, Awate and his comrades were not taken seriously and even demonized as bandits.
Bandits, okay.
Yeah. This really underscores just how isolated and maybe underestimated the movement was at its inception. They were perhaps seen as a fringe element, something easily suppressed.
But awaits foresight.
Right. His foresight, as presented, was that this initial fire would eventually spread and the heat would affect everyone, forcing the entire population to confront the reality of the occupation and potentially join the resistance. It kind of implies a strategic understanding that the enemy's own actions would eventually alienate the populace so much that the resistance would gain widespread support.
So the movement started small, maybe even dismissed by the occupying power. But the source notes that the Eritrean revolution wasn't static. It evolved over time. That sounds important.
That evolution is presented as absolutely crucial to its eventual success. The source details that the struggle initially began under the leadership of the ELF, the Eritrean Liberation Front. It went through various stages, which suggests, a process of learning, adaptation, maybe internal restructuring or shifts in strategy over the years.
And where did this evolution lead, according to the material?
Well, according to the source, this whole process culminated in the formation of the EPLF, the Eritrean People's Liberation Front. And it's specifically under the EPLF's leadership that the source says the vision for Eritrea's future was refined.
Refined meaning?
Implying that the core goals were clarified, or perhaps more sharply defined, maybe more strategically articulated by this new leadership structure.
Ah, the refined vision. Okay, this brings us to the very heart of the framework presented in these sources, the dual national vision. What were these two complementary goals that the EPLF articulated?
The sources are absolutely clear here. The two interconnected and complementary goals set out in the refined vision were basically twofold. First, the complete liberation of Eritrea from the control of Ethiopian occupation. Pretty standard for a liberation movement, right?
Right, the political independence goal.
Exactly. But second, and seemingly just as important in this framework, was the economic emancipation of Eritrea based on social justice.
That second goal, economic emancipation based on social justice, right there alongside political liberation. That's quite striking, isn't it?
Mm.
Why did the source emphasize pairing these two from the outset? Why wasn't just achieving political independence seen as, the sole ultimate objective?
This is where the source offers a key piece of insight into the philosophy guiding the movement as presented. It makes a very strong statement. Without creating an independent state, a nation cannot build its economy or advance the well-being of its citizens.
Okay, so independence is the key.
It's fundamental. This perspective positions political independence not as the end of the journey, but as an essential precondition. It's the necessary foundation, you see. You need control over your own destiny, your own territory, your own policy-making apparatus, which only statehood provides to even begin the task of building an economy that serves your people and addresses social justice.
I see. So it's about meaningful independence.
Exactly. Meaningful independence, as defined by this source, isn't just about raising a flag. It's about the capacity to build a society where citizens can actually thrive economically and equitably. So the two goals were, inextricably linked in their view. One enabled the other.
That really clarifies the strategic thinking presented in the source material. Statehood provides the sovereign power needed to pursue economic development for the benefit of the nation's people. But, as the sources also make very clear, achieving that first goal, political liberation, was anything but easy. It's described as an arduous road with significant setbacks.
Absolutely. Section 2 in our outline, it really delves into this difficult path to liberation. The journey spanned decades, and it was marked by immense hardship and losses. The source doesn't shy away from stating that there were significant setbacks in all aspects of the battle.
And what does the source identify as the primary reason for these difficulties and setbacks? Was it just the strength of the opposition?
This is a crucial point the source highlights. The setbacks were primarily because of major foreign power interventions.
Ah, okay. External factors.
Exactly. This suggests that the struggle wasn't just against the Ethiopian regime itself, which was formidable enough, but was complicated and prolonged by the involvement of external global powers. The source implies they were providing support or interfering in ways that bolstered the occupying forces. It frames the whole liberation struggle as occurring within a pretty challenging international landscape.
Right. Despite those major external complications, though, the source points to specific military operations as pivotal moments, like milestones on the path to liberation. Can you walk us through some of these key operations and explain, based on the source, why they were considered so significant?
Certainly. The source singles out several historic military operations. First, it mentions the initial significant battle waged at Mount Adal by Awate and his comrades. This is presented as more than just a skirmish. It's described as the first major armed engagement by the resistance, marking their intent and capability beyond being just, those bandits they were initially called.
Okay, establishing credibility.
Yeah, something like that. Then there's the commando operation that destroyed 33 fighter and transport aircraft. That's a huge number.
33 aircrafts, wow.
Yeah. The source implies this was a highly strategic strike, crippling the enemy's air power, which would have been a major advantage for the Derg regime. It speaks to tactical ingenuity and effectiveness as presented.
Definitely. What else?
Another key operation mentioned is the Naidu operation, which apparently destroyed a considerable command center of the Derg regime. Targeting a command center like that is about, well, disrupting the enemy's leadership and coordination capabilities. It suggests a move towards breaking down the enemy's entire operational structure.
Taking out the brain, so to speak.
Kinda, yeah. And finally, the Fenkel operation that liberated the port of Massawa. The source is very explicit about the significance of this one.
Massawa, the port. Why was that so critical?
The source states it paved the way to the total liberation of Eritrea in 1991. Liberating Massawa was critical because, well, it's a major port city. Control of the port would have severed vital supply lines for the Ethiopian forces, opened up access to the outside world for the Eritrean forces.
And a huge symbolic boost, too, I imagine.
Absolutely. A massive strategic and symbolic victory. It effectively isolated the enemy in the interior and really set the stage for their final defeat, according to this account.
Those sound like incredibly impactful turning points. Real hammer blows that broke the back of the occupying forces over time.
They are presented as decisive victories that built momentum towards the end of the war. And that end came on May 24th, 1991. The source pinpoints this date as the day the first goal, complete political liberation, was finally achieved.
And how does it describe the outcome?
It describes it in vivid terms, rendering the Derg regime, which the source characterizes as having one of the strongest army in Africa, into a force basically lost in the wind.
Lost in the wind. That's a very evocative phrase for a defeated army. Where does the source attribute that description?
The source quotes General Spentha Ephraim, stating he put it succinctly in one of his seminars. It's used to emphasize the totality of the defeat, this once formidable military power just sort of dissolving.
So May 24th, 1991, Eritrea achieves statehood, defeats a major military force after literally decades of struggle. For many nations, that would be the definition of victory, the final chapter written.
And this is precisely where the source offers that crucial perspective that shifts the narrative forward and sets the stage for everything that comes after. While acknowledging Eritrea's emergence as a sovereign state was undoubtedly a significant achievement, the source states emphatically that this marked only the halfway mark in the long journey towards its final goal as set out by its visionary leaders.
Here's where it gets really interesting. I mean, they fought for 30 years, achieved this monumental victory, secured their independence against incredible odds, defeating a powerful army. But the leaders, according to this source, saw it not as the finish line, but merely the halfway point. Just step one towards that larger objective. That completely reframes the story, doesn't it? And it underscores the depth of their initial dual vision.
It completely shifts the perspective from struggle completed to struggle entering a new phase. It highlights the unwavering commitment, as presented, to that second goal, economic emancipation, right from the moment independence was secured. But Section 3 of the material makes it clear that embarking on the second half of the journey immediately faced some pretty significant obstacles.
And the historical context of their independence is noted too. It happened during a globally significant transition after the end of the Cold War. The source mentions the initial optimism that kind of pervaded the international landscape at that time, a hope for a new era of peace and stability, without the intense superpower rivalry.
Yes, that post-Cold War period initially held out the promise of a more cooperative international environment, which could have been potentially favorable for new states like Eritrea. But according to the source, for Eritrea, that optimism was only short-lived.
Why short-lived? What happened immediately after this moment of triumph and independence?
Well, the source explains that despite the post-liberation plans of the Eritrean leadership, which were focused squarely on the rehabilitation of the war-ravaged economy and moving on to sustainable development endeavors, they apparently hit a major roadblock almost immediately.
A major roadblock?
Yeah.
Okay. What form did this roadblock take? Was it internal issues or...?
The source describes it as a myriad of hostilities. It's not presented as just isolated incidents, but a concentrated and diverse set of external challenges. The source specifies two main categories here: instigated wars and conflicts, and the imposition of illegal sanctions.
Instigated wars and illegal sanctions. That sounds serious. And does the source identify who was behind these challenges?
Yes, it attributes these multifaceted hostilities as emanating from forces of domination and exploitation.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit. So the source is claiming that right after achieving independence, literally when they were trying to rebuild from decades of war, they were met with deliberately instigated conflicts and sanctions, driven by entities described very strongly as forces of domination and exploitation. That really paints a picture of continuous external pressure, specifically aimed at hindering their post-independence efforts, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It frames the post-liberation period not as a time of peace to purely focus on development, but as a continuation of the struggle, albeit in different forms. And according to the source, these challenges directly impacted the pursuit of the second goal, economic emancipation.
How so?
It meant this goal had to be redrawn with new strategic development initiatives and defense mechanisms. Essentially, Eritrea had to reset its priorities in response to this new hostile reality as the source presents it.
So the initial plan for economic development couldn't just proceed as envisioned. It had to incorporate defense much more heavily.
Precisely. The source notes that Eritrea had to defend itself from the instigated wars, meant to reverse its hard-won independence in one form or another. The primary focus shifted, or at least had to strongly incorporate, the defense of their newly established sovereignty.
But did they abandon the economic goal?
Interestingly, the source makes a point of saying that the second goal, quote, was not completely put on the back burner. This implies that while defense took precedence and definitely reshaped the strategy, the underlying commitment to economic emancipation remained. It just had to be pursued within this very difficult context of active self-defense.
That leads us directly into Section 4 then, focusing on resilience and defense. The source strongly emphasizes this need to defend the hard-won independence from what are described as instigated wars designed explicitly to reverse it. That's a strong claim.
Yes, and the source claims that these hostilities, which it says came in various forms from these so-called forces of domination and exploitation, were met and deterred with a resounding defeat of the surrogate.
Surrogates, meaning proxy forces.
That's the implication, yes, that the external pressures were often exerted through proxy forces or conflicts, and that Eritrea, according to this account, successfully countered these, inflicting defeats on those acting on behalf of these powerful entities.
The source also makes a specific and notable point about who was particularly targeted during this period of ongoing hostility. It highlights the Eritrean youth, stating they were the primary targets of Eritrea's enemies and detractors. Why the youth specifically?
That's a key element in the source's narrative of this period. It draws a distinction between different generations of youth and their roles. The youth of yesteryears, as the source puts it, were those who were involved in the armed struggle itself and realized the first goal, achieving liberation and independence, back in 1991.
Okay, the liberation generation and today's youth.
The source speaks of today's youth trained in Sawa. Sawa, as you may know, is the location of Eritrea's National Service Training Center. It states that this generation, through this training experience, have defended Eritrea's sovereignty.
So it links national service directly to defense.
Exactly. It directly links the National Service Program to the defense mechanisms the country felt it needed to implement in the face of these post-independence hostilities described in the source. It shows the youth's role shifting from fighting for independence to defending the state's existence.
And the source doesn't stop there regarding the youth's role, does it? It connects their defensive role to the future, right?
Exactly. It then states that these same youth, the ones who defended the sovereignty, are now embarking on realizing the second goal of economic emancipation.
Ah, okay, so it's a continuum.
It creates a powerful continuum in the source's narrative. The youth fought for independence, the youth defended the independence, and now the youth are tasked with building the economic future. It positions the current generation as the drivers of the second half of that original dual vision.
And the source credits this sustained effort, both in defense and in pushing forward with development, to two core elements: the resilience of the Eritrean people and the resourcefulness and tact of the leadership.
It emphasizes that the struggle for economic emancipation, even in this phase of just laying foundations amidst hostility, has demanded a lot of sacrifice. But it's this combination, popular resilience and leadership capability, that, according to the source, didn't just manage to contain the unabated hostilities emanating from powerful entities.
Right, it says they did more than just contain them. The phrasing is quite strong. They successfully turned the tables on those who ineptly and senselessly chose to take the poison chalice.
That's incredibly strong descriptive language from the source, isn't it? Turning the tables and poison chalice.
Okay, let's unpack this. The source is claiming a significant strategic victory against powerful adversaries. Turning the tables implies that Eritrea, through its resilience and tactical approach, somehow managed to reverse the situation or gain an advantage over those trying to undermine it. And calling their adversaries' actions taking a poison chalice. Well, that suggests that the actions intended to harm Eritrea ultimately backfired or led to ruin for the adversaries themselves.
It definitely raises an important question. What exactly does the source describe that constitutes this turning of the tables and the adversary consuming the poison chalice? While the source doesn't detail specific counter-operations or the exact nature of the adversary's supposed ruin here, the language implies quite strongly that the efforts against Eritrea were not only unsuccessful in reversing its independence, but also resulted in significant, unforeseen negative consequences for those adversaries.
Suggesting a major miscalculation on their part.
It certainly suggests that, yes, a strategic miscalculation on the part of these powerful entities who perhaps underestimated Eritrea's resolve or its ability to defend itself and pursue its goals despite the immense pressure described.
So according to this narrative, it's not just about enduring the pressure, but about actively navigating and countering it in a way that shifts the balance. Okay, moving on to Section 5. The source states that even with these ongoing challenges and the clear need for robust defense, the groundwork for the second goal, economic emancipation, is being actively laid.
Yes, and it brings back that fundamental argument presented earlier. Without creating an independent state, a nation cannot build its economy or advance the well-being of its citizens. It reinforces the idea that political independence was the essential first step towards achieving what the source calls meaningful independence, which necessarily includes economic capacity and the ability to advance citizen well-being. You need the state first.
And the source describes the efforts over the last 2 decades towards this second goal as happening. How did it phrase it? Quietly but effectively.
That phrase, quietly but effectively, is telling, isn't it? It suggests a focus on tangible progress on the ground, maybe without a lot of external visibility or fanfare, particularly while the country was also managing these significant external pressures we discussed.
In what specific areas does the source mention for this foundational work?
The source details the specific areas where this groundwork and necessary infrastructure are being prioritized and laid down. It specifically lists health, education, transportation, agriculture, and then includes a catch-all category for other sectors.
So broad-based foundational stuff.
Exactly. It indicates a broad foundational approach, focusing on critical areas needed for any society to develop sustainably. The source views this work, building clinics, schools, roads, developing agriculture, not as the final achievement of economic emancipation itself, but as setting the stage to embark on its realization. It's about creating the essential physical and social infrastructure platform required for future economic growth and well-being.
So despite the continuous need to defend the nation, the long-term vision of economic emancipation is actively being pursued through these foundational investments. And Section 6, I believe, provides some tangible results, some concrete achievements from these efforts, right?
This is where the source offers some really striking data points to support its claims of progress. It highlights Eritrea's performance regarding the Millennium Development Goals, the MDGs. Those were the set of global targets for 2015. The source states that Eritrea achieved 6 out of the 8 MDGs.
6 out of 8. And the source makes a significant claim about that level of achievement, doesn't it?
Yes. It states that achieving 6 out of 8 MDGs makes Eritrea one of the few countries that claim such achievements. This is presented as strong evidence that despite the external challenges, focused efforts resulted in significant, measurable progress against internationally recognized development benchmarks, placing Eritrea, according to the source, in a select group of nations for its performance on these goals.
Okay, let's really zero in on the specific example the source provides for MDG 5, which focused on improving maternal health. What details does the source give here to back that up?
The source provides quite specific details for MDG 5 to illustrate the impact of that infrastructure focus we talked about. It states that as part of this effort, a clinic was built in every administrative district.
Every single...
That's what the source claims, yes.
Yeah.
Directly linking back to the infrastructure point, building out healthcare facilities across the country. And then it gives the claimed outcome, with 99% of Eritrean mothers receiving maternal health care.
Wow, 99% maternal health care coverage. That is an incredibly high figure, especially for a developing nation. Does the source provide any context for that number?
It does, which makes the figure even more noteworthy as presented. The source immediately provides comparison points. It states that this figure was 97% in industrially developed countries and only 53% in developing third world countries.
Whoa, wait a minute. 99% maternal health care coverage, according to the source, achieving a rate higher than the source's figure for developed countries and vastly higher than for other developing countries. That is incredible. That statistic, if accurate as presented here, really highlights the potential impact of that infrastructure groundwork they were doing, that quietly but effectively work.
It certainly seems to. Achieving that level of coverage in a post-conflict, developing nation facing the kind of ongoing external pressures described in the source would be, as presented here, a remarkable demonstration of progress in a critical area of human well-being and social justice.
Yeah, it's certainly held up in the source as a prime example of how this strategic focus on foundational sectors, like health infrastructure, can yield really tangible results, even amidst a challenging environment. It seems to demonstrate progress towards that social justice aspect of economic emancipation.
Exactly.
And the source looks beyond the MDGs too, doesn't it? Connecting this experience to the current global development agenda, the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs.
Yes, it draws a direct line. It quotes from a source titled Eritrea and the 2030 Agenda from 2023, arguing that Eritrea's experiences are noteworthy achievements during the MDGs period that have offered useful lessons and valuable insights and provided a firm platform to build on successes and drive forward with momentum in the SDGs period.
So the idea is that lessons learned and infrastructure built provide a strong foundation for tackling the current goals.
That's the argument presented, yes, that the momentum can carry forward.
The source also broadens the view a bit, considering Eritrea's place in the emerging global order. What does it say there?
It does. It suggests that this evolving global landscape basically calls for fairness in how the global economy is run and shared. And the source expresses the belief that Eritrea, in its humble ways, can positively contribute to these ongoing adjustments, especially in Africa.
Contributing to adjustments.
Yes, it positions Eritrea's national struggle and development efforts not just as an internal matter, but as potentially contributing to a wider global conversation about equity and fairer international economic relations, particularly within the African context.
And finally, the source brings the narrative full circle, doesn't it? Connecting back to that initial spark, a Witt's prophecy right at the beginning of the struggle.
It returns to that powerful image of Awate and his comrades standing close to the fire alone, initially dismissed. Their steadfastness, the source says, opened the way for Eritrea to become a sovereign nation. It makes sure to acknowledge the immense cost, the immense sacrifice demanded from generations of freedom fighters and the entire people.
Acknowledging the sacrifice is key.
Definitely. And it concludes by looking at the current moment, stating that those who took the torch and have been leading the way towards that second goal, economic emancipation, are now seeing something new on the horizon.
What do they see?
Yes, the source ends with this powerful, hopeful metaphor. They now see the far-reaching light of economic emancipation at the end of the tunnel. It beautifully links the initial isolated spark, the decades of struggle and sacrifice through the fire, to the present efforts and the prospect of finally achieving that second vital goal. The journey through the heat, it suggests, is leading towards the light of economic well-being.
This has been a truly deep dive into a complex and, well, determined national story, as presented through the sources you shared with us. From the very first shot fired by Hamid Idris Awate and his prophetic vision of a struggle that would eventually encompass the entire nation.
Right, through the long, arduous fight marked by those external interventions and significant sacrifices to achieve statehood in 1991.
The sources make it crystal clear that independence was viewed not as the culmination, but as a necessary prerequisite, effectively, as we discussed, only the halfway mark towards the broader, intertwined vision of economic emancipation based on social justice.
And crucially, the sources detail how the period after liberation was not some peaceful transition to development, but one marked by new forms of intense external pressure. Those instigated wars and illegal sanctions attributed to forces of domination and exploitation.
Yeah, that point really came through, and how this necessitated a constant defense of sovereignty and a fundamental adaptation of development strategies, forcing a really difficult balance between building for the future and defending the present.
Yet, according to these sources, through what's described as the immense resilience of the Eritrean people and the resourcefulness and tact of the leadership, The nation not only managed to defend itself and, in the source's very strong terms, turn the tables on adversaries, but also continued the vital work of laying the foundation for economic well-being.
Which included that significant infrastructure development in key sectors like health and education.
Exactly, leading to verifiable and, frankly, impressive achievements according to the data presented, like the exceptionally high maternal health care coverage highlighted in the sources.
The narrative is definitely one of continuous, multifaceted struggle, remarkable resilience, and persistent effort. And the nation's youth playing that pivotal, evolving role across different phases.
From fighting for liberation to defending sovereignty, and now, as the source puts it, embarking on realizing the goal of economic emancipation. The journey towards what the source calls meaningful independence is clearly presented as an ongoing process requiring sustained determination.
This deep dive was built entirely from the sources you shared, and we sincerely hope it's provided you with valuable insights and perhaps some aha moments about this complex and determined national effort, exploring the layers of its history and aspirations as told in these materials.
It certainly presents a powerful framework from the source material about the intertwined nature of achieving political independence and building a just and prosperous society, highlighting the enduring challenges faced even after statehood is secured.
And it leaves you with something significant to ponder, based only on this material. If achieving statehood is seen as only the halfway mark, and the pursuit of economic well-being must constantly navigate evolving global and external challenges, what lessons can we draw from Eritrea's experience, as described in these sources, about the continuous nature of striving for national goals and true sovereignty in a world of persistent external pressures?
What does meaningful independence truly require, not just to gain in the first place, but to maintain, defend, and build upon over the long haul?
A question that probably resonates far beyond just one nation's borders.